Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into something that might just completely change how you see yourself. We are exploring the brutal, unvarnished psychology of the highly intelligent mind. So often, we carry around these quiet insecurities about the way our brains actually work. We hide our quirks, we constantly apologize for our eccentricities, and honestly, we worry that we're just kind of weird. But what if the exact things you feel self-conscious about are actually the greatest indicators of extreme mental efficiency? This research is absolutely fascinating because it completely flips the script, so let's decode the hidden mechanics of your intelligence.
So are your weirdest habits actually signs of a highly complex brain? We spend so much energy trying to fit into this neat, neurotypical mold of what a smart person is supposed to act like. We think we're supposed to be perfectly polished, always confident, and seamlessly organized, right? Well, the psychology we're unpacking today tells a very different story. The habits that everyone else might label as odd, erratic, or just plain weird are very often the external markers of a brain running a highly sophisticated, deeply complex operating system right beneath the surface.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the myth of genius, and how we need to reframe intelligence.
Society has totally sold us on the idea of the movie genius. You know exactly the type. They have a pristine 4.0 GPA, they casually drop 5-syllable words into everyday conversation, and they stride into these high-powered corporate jobs with a perfectly organized briefcase. But let's be real, that is just a performance. The hard reality of real genius is much, much messier. It rarely looks like a Hollywood script. Instead, it shows up as a collection of strange, entirely unconscious patterns. To the outside world, these patterns just look weird. But internally, they serve an absolutely critical cognitive purpose. They aren't random quirks. They're the exact tools your brain uses to process a world that often feels overwhelmingly loud and complex.
Okay, let's dive into Section 2, processing the noise, and take a look at the internal mind.
Picture this. Have you ever been caught whispering to yourself in the grocery store aisle? Maybe you're having an intense, muttered debate about 2 different brands of pasta. People walking by might give you a funny look, assuming it's a sign of eccentricity or even instability. But psychology has a very different term for it: verbal reasoning. Highly intelligent people are frequently caught talking to themselves. By turning your abstract, internal thoughts into actual spoken words, you are literally externalizing your internal dialogue. This lets you organize your ideas incredibly efficiently and solve complex problems so much faster. It isn't weird at all. It's just your brain's structured way of staying completely focused and making smarter decisions. You're acting as your own sounding board.
This kind of internal processing also perfectly explains why you might get accused of overthinking all the time. To an outsider, your hesitation looks like crippling indecision. It looks like anxiety. They just want you to pick a restaurant or make a business decision and move on already. But your internal reality is a totally different story. You aren't paralyzed by anxiety, you are driven by cognitive complexity. Your mind is naturally and rapidly examining every single angle, consequence, and possibility that everyone else completely missed. You're essentially gathering a massive amount of data before choosing the best possible outcome. You flat out refuse to just react, because your brain prefers deep reflection over shallow processing.
Which brings us right to Section 3. Craving deep mental space and the social disconnect.
Think about taking really long walks entirely alone, or intentionally dodging small talk at a crowded party. From the outside looking in, it seems completely antisocial. But physically moving in solitude actually activates your brain's creative and problem-solving networks. You aren't running away from people, you're intentionally entering a deeper thinking state. Your mind literally craves the space to wander without the heavy distraction of social performance. Constant socializing, especially if it lacks depth, doesn't energize you, it drains you. Your brain is aggressively seeking depth and meaning over basic conversational filler.
There's a fascinating truth here, and it's summed up perfectly. Real intelligence doesn't need to sound smart. It simply can't stand to sound shallow. This hits the nail on the head, right? It is exactly why you probably find conversations about the weather or local office gossip to be physically painful and mentally exhausting. High IQ individuals often stay very quiet in group settings, and people mistake that quietness for shyness, or worse, they think you're just arrogant. But it isn't arrogance. You become incredibly engaged the absolute second a topic becomes complex or novel. It's just that your brain fundamentally rejects surface-level filler.
Let's pivot over to Section 4, structured chaos and obsession, or as I like to call it, extreme efficiency.
So, it turns out there is an actual scientific reason for the messy genius. If your desk looks like an absolute disaster zone, we're talking papers everywhere, half-empty coffee cups, but your digital file system is flawlessly color-coded and highly structured, you aren't being a hypocrite. You are practicing selective organization. High IQ minds just do not organize everything equally. They efficiently funnel their energy only into what actually matters, and they deliberately ignore what doesn't. To an outsider, your messy desk looks inconsistent or lazy, but it is actually a sign of extreme mental efficiency. You are actively refusing to waste your precious cognitive energy on insignificant aesthetic details.
And what about your learning style? Have you ever randomly dove headfirst into an incredibly niche topic? Something like the history of medieval architecture or the intricate mechanics of an antique pocket watch, and you do it with this intense, obsessive focus for 3 straight days, only to drop it entirely the second you finally understand it? You drop it because the puzzle is solved. This deep obsession is driven by a very powerful biological curiosity system. The act of learning itself triggers a massive dopamine reward in your brain. You have what psychologists call a high need for cognition. You aren't being erratic, your brain simply craves mental variety and conceptual depth rather than just surface-level volume.
All right, let's tie this all together in Section 5, Reframing Your Weirdness and Finding the Hidden Frequency.
When we pull it all together, we see these 6 undeniable markers of true cognitive depth. First, verbal reasoning or talking to yourself. Second, cognitive complexity, which everyone else calls overthinking. Third, activating solitude through walking alone. Fourth, selective organization, leading to that notoriously messy desk. Fifth, dopamine-driven obsessions with incredibly niche topics. And finally, a complete disdain for shallow small talk. What every single one of these has in common is that intelligence is an internal operating system. It's not a performance you put on for a crowd. If you recognize these behaviors in yourself, I promise you, you are not strange. You are just operating on a frequency that most people simply cannot tune into.
So, I have to ask, which of these habits do you recognize in yourself? Are you the messy desk genius, or maybe the quiet grocery store mutterer? The next time you find yourself apologizing for your quirks, or trying to cram your incredibly complex brain into a neat little socially acceptable box, I want you to ask yourself this. Are you really being weird, or are you just processing a world that hasn't quite caught up to your frequency yet? Thanks for exploring this with me today.